All right, what's up, YouTube? Thank you for tuning in again. This is episode 2 of the Lost Minds portion of the Two-Party System Network. And today we are going to be talking about rotating villains, how that works, especially in American democracy, who is guilty of it, and why it ties into the need to end the two-party system. My name is Anthony. This
I'm
is
Emily.
my beautiful co-host, Emily. And yeah, anything you wanted to share or get out of the way before we start getting into it?
No, I'm good. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and start off with the rotating villain. So this is a theory, and from like tweets, I think that Glenn Greenwald created this term. Am I wrong? I saw
I
some
don't know if he
tweets about that.
created it, but he
used it a lot,
definitely
and then
spotlighted it.
he used it a lot, and I guess like he tweeted something about it being that's why it got on Urban Dictionary or something. I don't know. It's on
Maybe.
Urban Dictionary now.
Perhaps.
But the definition is that in American democracy, when the majority party has enough votes to pass populist legislation, party leaders designate a scapegoat who will refuse to vote with the party, thereby killing the legislation. The opposition is otherwise inexplicable and typically comes from someone who is safe or not up for re-election, and this allows for maximum diffusion of responsibility.
Nice.
So yeah, we talked about this a little bit last week when we were talking about force the vote, or when we were talking about the CARES Act. I mentioned that a lot of progressives' role and kind of what started to split the left was that they were refusing to take responsibility for not blocking the CARES Act or creating some more provisions in the CARES Act that actually would help people and not have so much of an upward transfer of wealth. And that's just part of all of rotating villain. So a lot of things in our government are rotating villain. You can see it in a lot of different instances. We're kind of always talking about stuff, as we said last week, from the standpoint of the Democratic Party. This happens with both parties, and both parties do work together in order to, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit with the Ratchet effect, but both parties do work together in the rotating villain, but we are leftists on this channel, and so we are coming from a Democratic Party stance because that's kind of the biggest opposition to leftists creating and supporting third parties is the Democratic Party, and having this idea of having like progressive saviors within the Democratic Party to help the people. So yeah, the CARES Act was one example of that, where they will blame the GOP for some stuff. A lot of times this happens within the Democratic Party itself, though. So we saw a lot this past fall with the Build Back Better bill. There was a bunch of discussion about that, and the whole entire national conversation, at least around like leftist ideology and leftist spaces and like liberal spaces, was Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema blocking those bills and just kind of putting up a big fight to not have those go through. And you saw a lot of progressives coming after them for that, and really obfuscating the fact that they, as progressives and as leftists who care supposedly about socialism and implementing more socialist policies, should not have been supporting the Build Back Better bill at all due to the stuff that was in it. There was a lot of incrementalist concessions that were made, and they were still supporting it and still blaming Joe Manchin for that, when in ultimate reality they should have been blocking it or trying to get some other forms of progressive provisions into the bill. But it's just one example, because ultimately Joe Manchin at that point was the rotating villain. They chose Joe Manchin. They typically do choose Joe Manchin a lot.
Yeah. He's the most conservative Democrat. It's easy to.
Yeah. So, I mean, they choose him a lot to be the rotating villain, but also they will choose progressives to be the rotating villain. So when we had the vote for the Iron Dome, they were at that point the rotating villain. They voted for that. There's other examples, like Force the Vote, which we talked about last week, which can be somewhat made out to be a rotating villain in the sense that they didn't do what we were asking them to do, what progressives were asking them to do. And at that point, they were the villain. But in all reality, they were making conservative Democrats the villain, because they were saying that they would have done Force the Vote had conservative Democrats, centrist Democrats, would have supported and voted for Medicare for All. They didn't want to put Medicare for All on the floor for a vote because they knew it wouldn't pass. And so they were scapegoating conservative Democrats, corporate Democrats, for that, because they knew that they would not support for Medicare for all. So they completely diluted the goals of the Force the Vote movement. Yeah. And there's lots of others as well. I found a article from Glenn Greenwald in salon.com, and it's called The Democratic Party's Deceitful Game. I will leave it in the description for y'all to check out as well. But I wanted to go through this a little bit because he talks a lot about this as well, of how progressives even will use this as a way to like even dilute progressive ass and what we're actually wanting and asking for people to support. So Glenn Greenwald says in this article, this is what the Democratic Party does. It's who they are. They're willing to fiend support for anything their voters want, just as long as there's no chance that they can pass it. They won control of Congress in the 2006 midterm elections by pretending they wanted to compel an end to the Iraq war and Bush surveillance and interrogation abuses, because they knew they would not actually do so. And indeed, once they were given the majority, the Democratic-controlled Congress continued to fund the war without conditions, to legalize Bush's eavesdropping program and do nothing to stop Bush's habeas and interrogation abuses. So they said, like, for example, he says, gosh, what can we do? We just don't have 60 votes. And this happens a lot even with like Joe Biden. Like, since Joe Biden has been in office, we've seen a lot of, and since those two senators from Georgia got elected, when those two senators were elected, we saw a lot of things are going to change. We finally have a majority. If you're not supporting the senators in Georgia, you're not supporting progress. All this rhetoric around that. But then now that those people are elected, we're now told that we can't actually do anything that we're asking because of X, Y, and Z. So there's always going to be a reason why they can't do what the people are asking. So that's kind of the rotating villain. I don't know. Did I miss anything? Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, basically at the end of the day, in simple terms, what this is that it was a squad and the establishment in the Democratic Party making a deal basically to make it so that they can bounce back and forth between who the public blames for things and who the public gets mad at, basically. For the squad to do that, it's basically them giving cover to Nancy Pelosi and all of them, so that, with that case, they go after Manchin and Sinema so that people aren't mad at the leadership of the party. And so, and then the squad does it within their own circle with each other. They basically take turns blocking things, or they take turns breaking away from their coalition so that if something needed like 7 votes to not pass, they'll get 5, and then there will be 2 squad members that take all the blame for it, and then the next time the same thing will happen, it'll be 2 different members of the squad.
That actually happens so much that I can't even I don't know if we would even have time to talk about every single time that that's happened since even like Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman got in office, because that's happened so many times.
We don't need to give examples because it's going to happen again very soon anyway.
But just watch it. So I guess, and keep an eye out on it, because you'll see it happen where like literally one member of the squad will not vote for something and everyone else will, or 2 or whatever it may be. So yeah, watch that a lot because that happens pretty often. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Like the main person that they do this with is Ro Khanna, I think. He gets a lot of hate on Twitter, and rightfully so. He's done a lot of stupid and really bad shit. And the I lost my train of thought.
Pramila Jayapal does that too a lot, where she'll she's seen technically as a part of the Progressive House Progressive caucus in the House, but then she'll vote for certain things that make her not seem very progressive. So in all actuality, if we're going based off of her votes or a lot of these people's votes, they're not really progressive, but because they're able to switch and they sometimes vote for something that's progressive and then other times they don't vote for something that a leftist would support, they're able to obfuscate from being called completely like a sellout or completely a corporate dem or centrist. They're able to kind of weasel their way out of being held accountable for those votes because of that strategy. And it's really funny because that was never supposed to be the goal of electing progressives and Justice Democrats. It was always supposed to be for them to vote in a block. so that they can basically push policy one way or the other. It was supposed to be a hostile takeover of the Democratic Party in that sense. And that's what they've done. And they've chosen to protect their cushy government jobs and protect their personal relationships with the establishment in their party, in the Democratic Party. So because of that, they've taken on this rotating villain strategy. And there's one more quote from this article, and then I'll pass it to you, that I wanted to mention. And I'll start putting up pictures of the article because I, for some reason, can't screen share right now. But it says, same article, it says the primary tactic in this game is rotating villain. They always have a handful of Democratic senators announce that they will be the ones to deviate this time from the party position and impede success, but the designated villain constantly shifts, so the party itself can't claim it supports these measures, while an always changing handful of their members invariably prevent it. So 1 minute it can be one person, the next minute it can be another person. So it kind of, like I said, it allows them to be able to weasel their way out of taking responsibility for being very centrist politicians, especially progressives, because they don't want to be seen as that. They ran as like democratic socialists and socialists, so they don't want to be seen as centrists. And the establishment doesn't want them to be seen as centrists either, because it continues to herd people into the Democratic Party because they think that they have some sort of savior there to support the people. And same with people who are more centrist, maybe like Pramila Jayapal or anyone else who's involved in the House or the Senate. It prevents the whole party as a whole from being able to say, oh yeah, we really are a right-wing party, because they do have some members that sometimes vote okay and sometimes don't.
It also shields people from having really bad track records too.
Right.
It kind of distributes it so that it can't be so focused on one or two people. Which it's pretty damn smart.
It's very effective. It's genius, honestly, but it's very effective, and that's partially why you see so many people. And like we said, this happens in both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. I don't necessarily know the ins and the outs of how it happens in the Republican Party, because I don't pay attention as much, because like I said, we're a leftist podcast. We both are coming from a leftist ideology point of view, so we pay attention much more to the people that are more ideologically aligned with us, or at least say that they are. But it happens with both parties, and they do work together because of this rotating villain, and we're going to get into that next. But anything else with the rotating villain that you want to talk about?
No, not that I can think of.
Cool.
No, I think we covered everything pretty well.
Yeah, you'll hear us talk about rotating villain pretty often, and a lot of these concepts we're going to talk about today. We wanted to do this episode initially because this is like a really good starter point for, one, these definitions and these concepts to get out to people, but also in the future in our other episodes, we will definitely be touching on how certain current events or certain bills, situations that are happening might be a part of rotating villain theory or the Ratchet effect, and the list goes on about all
and it's also a good way to portray how like the mechanization of the party and the tricks that they pull, and I mean, it's super important. The Ratchet effect, this is how the two-party system works together to keep the American people down and keep the establishment and their donors up, basically. So what'll happen is the Republicans will be in power, and they'll basically normalize being so far off the spectrum to the right that they're bordering fascism a lot. And so the American people will get very riled up about that, or a lot of them will, and they'll call for returning back to normalcy, whatever that is. So then the Democrats will take back power, but now the Overton window has been shifted, and the Overton window is the spectrum of conversation that's allowed in the mainstream in politics. So the Republicans were so right for years and years and years. Now the Democrats can actually move further right than where they were before when the Republicans took over power, if that makes sense. So, you can see it in the Iraq War. When that was going on, the Democrats were very anti-war at the time, like even Pelosi and them. I mean, we were talking about examples of how behind the scenes they were actually helping Bush with his like spying and torture programs and stuff. So that was a big lie anyway. But what that did was it set the precedent for, we're against this, and the Republicans and Bush were major war hawks at the time. So they normalized that this is what the Republicans are. They're so far to the right, and it terrifies everybody. Aren't they so evil? Well, then Obama comes in, and what does he do? He shifts the Democratic Party more to the right, makes them the war hawks, and we're even seeing that now with the whole Ukraine situation. The Democratic Party and liberals are talking about we have to be tough, we have to be strong, and they're the ones foaming at the mouth for war now because we've had this ratcheting effect for going on 2 decades now straight of just hawkish people being in the spotlight, talking about needing to go to war, needing to expand the military budget all the time. And now the roles are flipped to where the Democrats are in power when this whole situation with Ukraine goes down. So now they're the ones leading the war drum. It's crazy. I mean, and they work together. So now the Republicans are going to take back power, and they're going to be even more crazier than they've ever been.
Yeah. And I'll have the picture up on the screen too for y'all to reference this. But so basically this is, and that's kind of how the rotating villain fits into this as well. The picture, it says, you'll see it says Republicans turn everything to the right, and Democrats block movement back to the left. And that's what where the rotating villain comes in, especially with the Democratic Party. So both parties are run by the corporate ruling class, the rich ruling class. So it makes sense that both parties would be in it together to block any movement to the left. Okay, so that's kind of where the rotating villain comes in, is that it's Republicans' job to come in and do all the big, bad, evil things, which is why when a Republican is in office, you see a lot of Democrats voting for legislation, supporting it. You'll see Nancy Pelosi, when Trump was in office, support a lot of what he did. And then when it comes time for, a Democrat to be in office, so Joe Biden, they'll do the rotating villain strategy, where they'll say, we don't have enough votes. If we only had 10 more progressives in office, if we only had 2 more Democratic senators, if we only got rid of Joe Manchin, got rid of Kyrsten Sinema, and that blocks movement back to the left. Because 1, it doesn't allow for any progressive legislation to happen, but then 2, it causes us to water down legislation. So like I said, with the Build Back Better bill, it did have some seemingly progressive things in it, but it was so watered down from what progressives or leftists would actually want. And it was so watered down from where the progressives that ran in Congress, the Justice Democrats, were asking for, that it blocked any movement or conversation to the left. So instead of talking about, Medicare for all, we're talking about lowering the age of Medicare to 55. So it really just creates this, like you said, shifting of the Overton window, but it also just blocks policy right where it is. It doesn't allow us to go any further to talk about other policy because we have to stop certain other things from happening. So ultimately what ends up happening is that you never get further to the left and you always get further to the right. You're in this position of being sent from center to right in conversation because you can't go any farther left than center when it comes to Democrats being in office.
The best example of this, war is a really good one, but healthcare, what's happened with that in the last 20 years is like Bush's healthcare plan was barbaric and super unpopular at the time, and everybody knew it was really messed up. And so Obama comes in, he ran on Medicare for all, turned on that, said, we're going to go for a public option, gave up on that after a couple months in office. Lefties were pissed, obviously, but everybody else in the country was like, well, it's a lot better than what that asshole Bush wanted to give us. And yeah, I guess it's kind of like, it's like if somebody told you, oh, being peed on is better than being pooped on. It's like, yeah, no shit, but it's still gross and I don't want it, like it's the same argument kind of. But then Biden comes in, he never even promised to run on Medicare for all. He said, I'm going to try a public option. And everybody knew he's not going to try a public option, but it's been so normalized to just blame the other party for it that nobody even made a fuss about it.
Yeah.
And he gave up before he would even went into office.
Yeah.
He got elected, and then before he went in office was like, oh yeah, we're not going to be able to.
Yeah, and that's what you saw. You saw Trump take a bunch of people off of Medicare, destroy Medicaid, stuff like that. But then you see like Joe Biden supporting a public option, and now you even have these progressives that ran saying, oh yeah, we need to support a public option. Like these progressives, Justice Democrats, the squad, all ran on Medicare for all. They were saying the words Medicare for all, and now you never hear any of them say the words Medicare for all. Not in tweets, not in conversation, any of it, because they have to be loyal to the party. And I put in here too, I think it's a little bit farther down in like the effects of it, but it really just shows you that like you don't change a party, the party changes you. Like same with the Democratic Party. I'm sure it's the same with the Republican Party. Like the Democratic Party, you don't change the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party changes you. And for a multitude of reasons, because you have a cushier job, especially with the squad, like a lot of these people were elected as working class people who were struggling to make ends meet. And that's why we all loved them and supported them. But once they got those cushy government jobs and now they're totally comfortable and they're on magazine covers and they're more like celebrities, they're not willing to actually challenge the establishment. So they're getting into that rotating villain role so much because that's the only role that they can play. The Democratic Party doesn't actually want them. And this could be the same for the Republican Party. They don't actually want them to do anything to help the people. So they have to put them into these positions where they don't want to help the people, and they're going to dilute their conversation more and more. That still is, but it still allows people to believe in them so that they can sheep herd them into the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party. Again, I'm sure it happens the same way.
But, the Republican Party, I mean, they did that with the Tea Party movement effectively. I mean, they still have, like, the Republican Party actually has more room for a movement to happen within it to where they oust. I mean, that's what happened when Obama was in office. The Tea Party movement was kind of to threaten the establishment of the Republican Party. So much that the speaker at the time actually stepped down because he was just getting tired of dealing with their BS. And I mean, it wasn't BS. They were doing what we want the squad to do. They were coalescing and building a coalition and building power to threaten them. But now I know the Republican Party is kind of, and like Trump kind of did it. He made them get along more a little bit. And I'm sure conservatives who follow the Republican Party more would have better answers for that. But yeah, the Republican Party does this too, because the establishment, they don't want guys like Trump and them like causing a ruse and creating this tension that threatens them, because the Republican voters are a lot more mobile than the Democratic voters are too.
Yeah.
Because if they were to go and say, yeah, this party sucks and they're not giving us what we want, we're going to take it over, it's more possible for them to do it. So it's probably worse than the Republican Party, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know though.
Cool. Anything else with the Ratchet effect?
No.
Okay. So next we're going to talk about the Democratic Party election cycle. And again, we're only talking about the Democrats because we're more like closer to them ideologically, and they try to cater to us more ideologically.
And the Republican Party's too far gone. There's no possibility of us ever being able to work with that. So
I mean, both are, but like I said, we're just more ideologically, like they in theory aligned with Democrats, and a lot of people who were more principled about these issues are now like going to the Democratic Party. So from our point of view with the Democratic Party election cycle, basically what happens is that Democrats will win elections. So we'll use this example maybe of like Joe Biden. I'll try to follow the example of Joe Biden. Yeah. So Joe Biden wins the general election. We knew that he wasn't going to do anything to help the working class. One, because politicians lie all the time. But even before, in his primary or in his general election campaign, we had no leverage coming from Bernie Sanders to leverage his movement to change any policy positions of Joe Biden, to get any progressive concessions in exchange for votes. We had a lot of like progressive folks, including Bernie Sanders, the squad, really just shaming people into voting for Joe Biden. So a lot of us knew that the working class was going to get no help from Joe Biden. However, unfortunately, a lot of people are duped by just politicians lying, and then having certain other politicians that they truly trust come in and support those certain candidates. So
and fear too.
Yeah, and fear. So Joe Biden wins the election. So a Democrat wins the election. The working class gets no help. This is where the rotating villain excuse comes in again, is that, again, they will block progressive policy, or they'll water it down so much that it actually does nothing for people, or it makes things worse for certain groups of people. And then Democrats lose the election. So we're about to see a massacre in 2022 with Democrats because of the results of all the shit that has not been done with the Democrats. So Democrats lose elections. We'll see that in 2022. We saw it in, the last presidential election in between. And then Dems promised to do something this time. So it's the lesser of two evils excuse. And you get that all the time with the Dems and the Republicans, which is that two-party system kind of tricking you into, like we said last time, voting, which is really just an illusion in American democracy at this point.
The Democrats love losing midterms because they love having the White House, but then not having either of the two other bodies, because then that Joe Biden can point the finger.
Right.
Like, I can't work with these crazies.
It goes back to, and you'll start to see how everything we're talking about goes and starts to make sense and connects with each other.
Right.
Because all them promising to do something or them losing elections, then they can say that they're going to do something this time. But really, in all reality, they love losing elections because then they can go right back to that rotating villain excuse, and they can continue to just sheep herd people into their party because they can say, look at these awful people, look at what they're doing. We can't do anything because of this, this, and this. If only we had a few more people in Congress, please vote for us. And that's how they just trick you into continuing to vote for them. And to, especially now, we're seeing so much of a rise in like popularity with progressive candidates that don't support, aren't super centrist in theory, or don't have corporate backed campaigns succeeding, because they'll say, if only we had this amount of people more in Congress, we could actually get something done. And that goes back to the Ratchet effect. Again, they're two corporatist parties. They don't want to move anything to the left. So them losing elections only helps them. Same with the Republican Party. It goes back and forth, which is why you see a lot of times there will be one Republican president and one Democratic president, and it switches every 4 years. Very rarely do we get to, terms out of people, at least in more recent times. Then Dems will promise to do something this time. It's the lesser of two evils excuse, and Republicans do this as well. Like, oh my gosh, the mean, evil Democrats, look at what they're going to do. And they go back and forth to do these certain things. Yeah. I also saw something that was really interesting in relation to this and the Ratchet effect, which is that Republicans are policymakers and Democrats are fundraisers. And that's what they end up doing, because Republicans get in, and like we said with that Ratchet effect, Democrats vote for all their policy, push it so that the Overton window shifts to the right, because that does benefit Democrats, especially corporate Democrats who benefits the donors the most. And then during that time, that's a huge opportunity for Democrats to fundraise, because then they can say, again, look at what these evil Republicans are doing. Donate to us so we can do this. Donate to us so we can get more campaigns. And then that money is also shared with super Republican or right-wing candidates. We saw even that like progressives in the squad were giving their money to these really corporate Democrats as well, who are basically very right-wing. So it really helps everyone. The Republicans' responsibility is to pass policy, and the Democrats' responsibility is to fundraise for the two-party system as a whole. That's kind of the cycle. And then it just continues to go around and around. Like, Democrats will promise to do something this time. Maybe they'll win another election. Maybe they won't. It probably won't. Like, I don't see Democrats winning another election in the next presidential election because of everything that's happened. But maybe in the next presidential election they will. So it just continues to go around in this cycle, but you'll start to see how everything starts to connect. Like, the election cycle connects to the rotating villain. It also connects to the Ratchet effect with Dems losing elections or Republicans losing elections. And the whole goal is just to continue to move everything to the right, to shift everything into a much more right-wing, ideology and conversation amongst the country. Right. And now we're like, we really, in times of Bernie Sanders, we saw a lot of people talking about Medicare for all, like politicians talking about Medicare for all. Even now you see with Joe Biden being president, you see a lot of Republicans using a lot of progressive language And it's like, it's really weird, but you'll see that a lot. But then over time, it'll start to shift back over to the right. And we're slowly going back over to the right. And then at some point, again, people are going to start getting fed up, just like they were right before 2016. And we'll go back to that more progressive language. But what keeps happening is that when we go back to that progressive lefty language, they will then co-opt that language. The Democratic Party specifically will. Sometimes the Republican Party will. And they'll just start to shift it right back over to the right again. At some point, this country is going to become fed up with the back and forth. But unfortunately, a lot of people in this country have been fooled. And it's a genius plan, like we said. So it's not anyone else's, not a regular person's fault for this. But a lot of people are very fooled by this back and forth of rhetoric. And
it goes hand in hand with like I'm sorry to cut you off.
No,
I'm just adding to it. We live in such a capitalistic and individualistic society where everything's, a grind and hustling and bustling and busting your ass, that you forget about this stuff over time. And that's really the thing, is time. They know 100 million people don't vote in every cycle, and they love that. The people that do vote are working people, and they don't pay attention every day because they can't. And so the rare times that they do pay attention, they've been working on the political soap opera they've been building up to scare the shit out of everybody to make it so that they all run to the Democratic Party. Like, normal people don't. They're like, man, I love the Democratic Party. They're awesome. They're like those damn Republicans. I hate them. And they vote for anything.
Or they're just not like ideologically aligned or partisan in general. Like a lot of people don't have a team that they support. A lot of people are very like independent. They don't have a idea one way or the other, or they just they actually don't like either party, so they just don't vote, or they so it's just a cycle that continues. And like I said, you'll start to see all this click, and especially if you look at the election cycle, both of the previous concepts that we talk about fit in here, which is why we wanted to mention the election cycle, because that's really the full circle moment of how everything works. And same with the Republican Party. But like I said, Dems win elections, that working class gets no help is that rotating villain piece that we talked about. And then right after that is where the Ratchet effect comes in. And even in the process of getting to that next part of Democrats losing elections, that Ratchet effect continues to come in.
I love the hand,
just the movement.
I love it.
But yeah, but really I think too, the Ratchet effect is involved in every single part of this cycle in some way or another, because even in Democrats promising to do something this time, you get less and less progressive. Like we said, like progressives were supporting Joe Biden in a public option instead of pushing for Medicare for all, because it's better than Trump and whatever Trump would offer. So it just continues to go throughout this whole cycle, but you really see it happening a lot with like that Democrats lose elections part with the Ratchet effect, because that's when a lot of times, and the promising to do something, that's when a lot of times that comes out to play.
And that is literally what Trump helped them do with healthcare. I don't know if it was a plot where they were like in cahoots. I don't know. Yeah. I think so, but I don't know. But it is weird, because remember how horrible Trump Care was when he when he released it, and everybody freaked out because they had on their the preconditions. Am I saying that right? They had like pregnancy, acne, like it was the
really
most
random stuff.
It was like the most barbaric piece of legislation in American history, easily. And so that really set the stage for Joe Biden to come in and be able to offer anything,
right?
And it would be quote unquote better.
But and that's kind of where people need to stop believing in certain people in the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party, of these people who are saviors in their own ideological way, right? We have saviors who are more progressive in the Democratic Party, and maybe we have folks in the Republican Party, I'm not sure. Yeah. But maybe folks that are more populist in the Republican Party that are appealing.
There's a few,
Yeah, so like that's where we need to stop believing in those people, though. Because I said, you can't change the party changes you.
Right.
It's all about what they can do to what they can offer you. I mean, you see it a lot in like television shows, but it really does happen. Like, what can they offer you? What can they bribe you? How can they make your life so comfortable and cushy that you would never want to break ties with this
And there's
deal
also
that you
like
have.
human psychology going on there too. Like, it's like you don't want to argue with your coworkers because it makes everybody uncomfortable or whatever. But in that kind of job,
That's the point.
You can't get comfortable with those people.
Yeah.
You can't go to dinners with them. You can't give them hugs and you know, send them gift cards or Christmas cards every year. Like, no, screw that.
Yeah, but it's because it's like
But
it really
it's what
is
they
like
do. It's how they get lumped in.
Yeah.
And it's they start being like, you know, they're like Nancy Pelosi. I'm sure she's pleasant. She might be really freaking nice in person.
Right.
But she's a monster legislatively. And I'm sure she does make people comfortable. And they're like, you know, Nancy's not that bad of a person. She's really nice. She sent my grandkids, you know, money or whatever, and gave the fam Christmas gifts. Like, I'm not gonna go out and publicly embarrass her.
Like, say that's what happened, I think, a lot with like Bernie Sanders saying that Joe Biden was like his good friend. Was like, I'm sure Joe Biden is a really friendly guy when you meet him, but like but that's where it gets tricky. But then I also heard a lot too that like Ilhan Omar, like a lot of times Nancy Pelosi will like ask how their kids are doing, and like, you know, that's part of the game is like they try to build relationships with people who are trying to disrupt their party and the whole like order of things.
Try to like welcome into the family kind of thing.
It's kind of like I've seen a lot of memes of like when you go to a new job and they say we're a family here. It's like red flag. Like that's what I picture when it comes to that. But yeah, I mean, it's just a cycle, and that's why it matters for us to stop believing in those people who are saying that they're going to be saviors, because ultimately there can't be saviors to a party that is so deeply corrupt to its core. You really can't change that. That's why we believe like we don't believe in reforming capitalism. Like, capitalism and imperialism is so rotten to its core. You can't reform it to be any better if you try to reform it, you're going to leave out so many populations. Right. And like we said, we don't think that any community is disposable. So that's kind of where that comes in for us. But
do you want me to
go ahead.
Just kind of wrap this up, because this is more of a summary of what we've already been talking about. This has a lot of points. Yeah, and just for the sake of not repeating ourselves, this is more just to wrap up, a reminder that this is kind of the gist or the point. Again, progressive Democrats are never ever going to really disrupt their cushy government jobs. Or like populist Republicans, like any of these people, especially people who are loyal to the party. But you really have to watch out for those people that are trying to be insurgents in the party and like trick you. This is just to point out, it's a two-party system. This is how it operates on both sides. It doesn't really matter the semantics of who's better or who's worse. They're both they're both evil. So, I mean, that should really be the main takeaway from that. And you can't change the Democratic Party again. It changes you. It coalesces you into it, and it changes who you are as a person, and it changes your principles and your morals and your beliefs. And then, you know, again, always gonna have a villain, whether it's the conservative part of the Democratic Party or the progressive part
or the actual other party. They'll always blame each other.
And
there's always a villain.
You know,
this is I already quoted that article. That basically is just, again, like, Democrats, this is what they do. It was part of the rotating villain, but like, this is what they do. This is who they are. It's not like a certain strategy. This is something that both parties are in on.
How they operate. And that's just the mechanization of the two-party system.
Right.
And this is why it needs to die. Right. We need to smash it up into dust and watch it blow away into the wind.
Yeah.
And even progressives, the people who seem the best and like good people, are selling people out. Right. The class that they came from too. Like, we talk about how cool it is when we have rich class traders, but these people are class traders, and it's the most insidious thing I've ever seen in my goddamn life. It really is. I mean, shame on them. Shame on like Cori Bush. She was homeless. Shame on AOC, who, like, I've heard that her backstory, her arc was kind of BS. Yeah. I mean, she worked like the whole, you know, I was a bartender and blah, blah, blah. She worked for Tim Kennedy. Yeah. Like, she learned the craft.
I think a lot of it
that
is. I think a lot of it
perspective.
with AOC is like still up in the air, but there's a lot of discussion about where.
Right, but I'm just
that
saying you can
comes from.
see the strategy behind
Mhm.
painting her as something she might not
Yeah.
be to make her more sympathetic to people.
And they even sell out
And-
each other, like when,
Yeah,
like with the Iron Dome and everything. Like you're
Right.
literally selling out Rashida Tlaib, who
And
her
they've-
community. She's
they voted for
Palestinian.
sanctions on Somalia,
Yeah.
and Ilhan Omar voted
Right.
against it. That's where she
Right.
came from. The rest of them voted for it.
Yeah, and that's
It's
like
horrendous.
that's rotating villain in like action right there. That's why we said like keep an eye out in the future, and we'll also point it out when we see it of like everyone voting against it except for one person.
But then they have the nerve, they have the gall to go out in public and act like they're better than the other side, and act like, oh, these Republican politicians are psychos. You sanction one of your friends' home countries,
or do the
hell is wrong with you?
Do the political theater aspect and the performative activism of like going out and shedding tears over kids in cages when Trump is in office, but then supporting like wars and imperialism and
I mean they were silent about kids in cages when Biden was doing it in the first few months of his.
So they're not only selling out the people, they're selling each other out too, and for their own benefits. But it's just it's the game.
Are we ready to wrap this up or what?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention last thing is that obviously like our call is always, as we said in this show and on our podcast, is always for direct action. It's always for mutual aid. We do believe in ending the two-party system. We do support third parties. If we're going to be a part of electoral politics, it has to be through third parties. We have to do ranked choice voting. We have to find other ways to make third parties viable. And we're in complete support of that.
Well said.
I wanted to mention too that like politicians have never been the ones to help the American people. There's not one case where a politician has said, let me do this for you because I have the goodness of my heart to do so. It's because the people have always supported themselves, and we've always been the ones to demand change.
And pressure.
But also we've taken care of ourselves. Right. Like there have been people that have done mutual aid. You can think of the Black Panthers. You can think of a bunch of mutual aid situations right now. I don't love charities, but even charities have a lot of problems, but even some charities are doing that work too. So the people have always supported each other, and we have to come up with more like viable forms of supporting each other and systems of supporting each other so we can do things like general strikes and really hold these people accountable and hold their feet to the fire, because ultimately we should be voting outside of the two-party system. We should be voting for third parties, but they still deserve to be held accountable, and these two parties, and that we have to do that by supporting each other. So no one's coming to save us yet until we can get a third party in that hopefully will. And that's
even a third party.
We still have to hold them accountable.
Driven, and it's still going to be the people are going to be pressuring
regardless
them
of
to stay on this path.
Right? Like stay on the path. Like regardless of who's in, we have to be involved with staying on the path. So we have to build our systems of mutual aid. We have to build our systems of organizing and direct action. We just have to be more involved. So I just wanted to point out that like regardless, basically the whole lesson of this episode is that politicians are not coming to save us on both sides, and we have to be the ones to hold their feet to the fire, hold them accountable. Like even if a third party isn't viable in anyone's mind, like that's not the point. It's to draw like votes away from this duopoly so we can hold them accountable and let them see the consequences of their actions. And also we need to support each other. So support your local mutual aid, support your charities around you, organize, try to get involved as much as you possibly can. I would love to do an episode maybe on our channel, unless y'all are really interested in seeing it, about like one-to-ones and how like doing some trainings, because my practical experience is less in like theoretical stuff, but more in organizing, like practical organizing skills. So I would love to do some trainings for y'all possibly on like how to just organize your community, how to organize your friends and family, but just try to do that as much as you can. That's really what we need to do to move forward. And that's kind of the lesson of this whole episode, but that was the last thing I wanted to mention. So
sweet. To really put the icing on the cake, since we're talking about how the two parties are in cahoots and they work together. Joe Biden, there's a quote right before he officially took office. He said, "We need a strong Republican Party in this country." And then him and Mitch McConnell have been really close friends for like 3 or 4 decades now. Nancy Pelosi and Lindsey Graham are really good friends. This is all bullshit, basically, is what I'm getting at. And we need to end it together. as a community, as a society, we just need to burn that system to the ground.
To wrap up, I want to say thank you all so much for your love and support on our last video. We really appreciate.
Blew my mind.
Yeah, like it was crazy how much support you guys gave us. We are super thankful, super grateful for all of you. Thank you so much for tuning into the network. This is going to be huge.
Like, you know, future plans. I'd love to make like a video, like addressing the Democratic Party directly, addressing the Republican Party directly, whether that's asking the question of which one's better than the other. Does it even matter? You know, and then we'll talk about it and leave it up to the viewers. And then make some cool videos about, you know, Joe Biden's presidency, give a little like report card video.
Yeah.
Just giving some future plans. Here's what you can look forward to.
And also, like we've said multiple times, leave us any suggestions in the comments of things you guys would want to see, things that you like, questions that you may have for us that we could answer as a leftist Marxist podcast. But yeah, that's it for this week.
We should really make a video, like take president, like the past like 4 or 5 presidents, and make like a list of impeachable offenses that they all did, and like actually make an argument. I mean, there's an argument to be made for every single one of them just being like tossed in the Hague for eternity. But like, we should definitely make a video about that and just highlight how it doesn't matter who's in office. They do this. They all do the same stuff.
Yeah. You can see the creative juices flowing.
Oh, yeah.
with us. Yeah. But that's only because y'all have supported us and we've been so energized by it. So
we just want to put out good informational and educational content that keeps people engaged. And because that, I mean, you know, we don't want this to be a news show because that's boring. You know, this is a podcast. This is a community, and we're here to have fun, but also
talk about serious stuff.
Issues. And trying to create a movement to actually end the two-party system.
Yeah.
Because it's got to go.
So in that vein, support End the Two-Party System. Like them on all social media. We'll have it all posted below. Their website below. Get involved. Support. Buy merch. Volunteer. Do all the things. Also, I always leave, or I have been last video, I left Lost Minds information. We have a link tree, so that links to like our Patreon, ways to support us financially, ways to see our channel, social media, all that stuff. So please check out the description. I'm going to leave the article that we talked about today in the description as well if you'd like to read more into it. But all the things to support are down there ready for y'all to reference. But yeah, basically just thank you all so much for your support. Thank you for your support on our last video. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope it was informational for you and something that you can use moving forward to really change the lens in which you view our government and the way that it works.
Feel free to steal these points to argue with your liberal and conservative family members.
Their minds.
You don't have to credit anybody. Just go hard and, you know, try to change hearts and minds. Be respectful though, because they won't listen to you.
True. That's one thing that y'all can definitely look forward to, if not on this channel, on our channel, is I want to get one of my friends on here that does intergroup dialogue and talk to her about like what she's learned and how to have conversations with people and change their minds about things, because she's very educated on it.
That's cool.
But yeah,
educated from like a professional kind
of like a practical way. Like she took a lot of classes on it, and then she also like taught a class on it and had a group of students that learned it too and did a lot of conversations. But that's just one thing additionally. But yeah, have conversations with people, change hearts and minds, organize, and yeah, we're in solidarity with y'all. So we'll see you next week. Thank you all so much. Bye guys.